Okay, so good to start.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever time of the day it is to all of you. Thank you for joining us in the second session of the Classroom Behavior Systems strand, G2. And we are going to dive into data, which is, I think, everyone on this panel, one of our favorite topics. My name is Kimberly Yannick, and I'm with the Center for Social Behavioral Supports at Old Dominion University in Norfolk and living in Virginia Beach. And I'm going to introduce my colleagues joining me shortly. But before we do that, we're going to take a quick speed dating with some of the forum information. So just as a reminder, the expectations, have fun was not on here, but I have to give a shout out to you all for having fun and entertaining each other with jokes in the chat room. We were loving that. So I think everything here is pretty self-explanatory. This is self-explanatory. And we'll keep going over to the chats and the polls. We got extra practice with navigating the session page with the first session this morning. So if we continue on, just to let you know, there will be two polls in the beginning, towards the beginning of the session today. And towards the end of the session, we'll ask you to post any questions that you have, also using the polls. And I think we've all, again, had plenty of practice with that one. Lots of opportunities. If you do get stuck and need help, remember there's a help desk that you can access. And so I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Jennifer Freeman, who she is from the University of Connecticut. And before she begins, I've just got to tell you, I can't think of a better person to lead this session. I've worked with Jen for just a little while, but what I've noticed about her is every time she shows up for a meeting or training or anything, she is packed with the data, and she's got the knowledge and the passion to support the rest of us with that. So I'm going to turn it over to Jen, and she's going to get us started.
All right, thanks, Kim. And I am a bit of a data geek. That is true. So happy Friday afternoon for those of you on the East Coast. That's where I am. There's no better time to talk about data. We have three key outcomes or intentions for today's session. The first is to just talk about some ways to use data to support the accuracy and fluency of teachers' implementation of classroom practices. We'll then talk a little bit about some tips and strategies for how to use data to guide this in a hybrid or remote environment. And then the key to all of this is really thinking about how do we create that sustainable culture of data informed decision making. So I'm going to give you just a really quick overview of some resources that are available to guide this work. And then I'm going to turn it over to the Santa Clara team, who I'm really excited to hear from today. So you guys have seen this, this graphic hopefully many times at this point on your way through this forum. I wanted to just highlight a couple of resources that are available to guide the work with respect to classroom practices in particular. So there are, within the larger PBIS framework, we think first about our overall outcomes, and then we use data, practices, and systems to inform the work that we do. The same is true in the classroom. And you just heard Amy and Terry give a fantastic presentation around what those specific practices are and what those look like. There's more information on those practices in that supporting and responding to behavior guide. And you can find that in the classroom section of pbis.org. In order to support those practices, though, it's really important that we use data to guide that. So we're going to spend some time during this session today sharing a guide around how to use data to support your classroom practices. And then systems are also essential, and that's the things we do to help support teachers. And that's really, really important when it comes to classroom practices, because we can't assume that teachers have had training or support in the past in this area. And so we really need to be thinking carefully about what professional development needs to look like. And there is a resource also available on pbis.org to help support that as well. So there is a practice guide, a data guide, and a systems guide, all focused on classrooms on pbis.org. So Christy, you can go to the next slide. The data guide in particular, because this is a data session, walks through these 4 key steps. You can pop up the first animation there to make it big enough for people to read. The first step in using data to guide this process, and this is sometimes somewhat counterintuitive. The first step isn't how are the kids doing? The first step is how are the adults doing? And are the teachers implementing these core practices that you just heard Terry and Amy talk about with fidelity at a level that makes them strong and effective? And that's a difficult thing to sometimes measure. So I wanted to point out one resource. Actually, the link was on the last slide, but it's available at northeastpbis.org. And it is a classroom walkthrough tool that you can use to help measure your fidelity of implementation. And along with that are some resources about how to measure that in a hybrid and remote environment. So if you're looking for a tool to measure fidelity, which is sometimes the stopping point for classroom data, you can go to northeastpbis.org to look for that. After we know whether or not the adults are doing what they're supposed to be doing, then we look at how the kids are doing. We look at, are the kids achieving their desired outcomes? Are they behaving appropriately? Are they engaged in their academics? If the answer to that is yes, you celebrate. You've got teachers doing what they're supposed to be doing. You've got kids doing what they're supposed to be doing. You celebrate, but you continue to monitor because we know life changes very quickly, especially in 2020. So we're going to continue to monitor that. If we look and we say the teachers are doing what they're supposed to be doing, but the kids are not yet meeting expectations, we need to drill down deeper to learn more about what's going on, the same way we do school-wide. So we're going to do some problem solving. We're going to drill into the data and get a sense for what's the nature of the problem, who's involved, how often are they involved, why are these problem behaviors happening? And just like we do school-wide, we're then going to build an action plan to help support the changes to our implementation that we need to make based on that data. And then that funnels right back into, if we're going to make changes to our implementation, we then need to make sure that the adults make those changes. So it kind of cycles right back around to the fidelity question at the beginning. So that's the cycle that you're going to hear the Santa Clara team talk about today as they work through this. They're going to give you some really concrete examples of how they did it. The key for all of this is that this is not a one-size-fits-all thing. So the framework and the database decision-making piece, that's what you take with you. For every one of you, though, you're going to need to listen carefully to what these guys present and think about the social validity and equity in your own school environment. And what are the tweaks you need to make to be sure that what you're doing in your school fit your context and fit the needs of your kids, and that you have the data you need in your school environment to inform what you're doing. So in some cases, the things you hear, you're going to be able to take and run with right away. And in some things, you're going to say, actually, I need to tweak that a little bit for my environment. And that's really important. And in that data guide that's on pbis.org, there are tables with examples and non-examples and resources and links for all of the things that I just said. So if you want to dive in deeper to that, you are more than welcome to download that resource. It's freely available. And again, those tables have a lot of resources linked directly in them. But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Christy and Nicole and Jaime, who are going to share with you what this looks like in real life.
Welcome. We're thrilled to be here with you today, and we're going to share our database decision-making process to support implementation of classroom practices. I'm Christy Tapia. I'm a Santa Clara Unified District PBIS coach, and I'm here with two of my internal site coaches.
Hi, my name is Nicole Gonzalez, and I am a 4-5 special education teacher on an elementary campus, and I'm also the internal site coach for PBIS.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jaime Torres. I'm a third grade teacher at Catherine Hughes Elementary School, and I'm also the internal site coach for Catherine Hughes.
All right. Thank you, guys. So now that you know who we are, we want you to take a poll for us because we want to know who's in the audience. So if you can look and find poll number 1, it's going to ask you, what is your role? Are you a teacher, administrator, support staff, or other? And then Nicole's going to read out the results to us in about 30 seconds.
Okay, so it looks like we have 23% of the people today are teachers, 20% are administrators, 22% are support staff, and 35% are other. It's still coming in and changing. I got 25 now for teacher, but that's looking great.
Thank you, Nicole. I know in the virtual world, wait time seems so much longer, I think, that 30 seconds. Today we're here. Thank you for participating. It is really nice to know who's in the audience. Today we're here and we're going to highlight 3 aspects of our system. And the first part is the external support model. And then we're going to talk about how our data has gone through an evolutionary process throughout the years. And then the shift from the external to internal ownership. And before we get into our story, we want you to take one more poll. So poll number 2, and we want you to rate your site based on the decision-making process you use based on data to drive your classroom practices system. And this is in tier 1. And 1 star would mean you not at all, you're not using data at all. 2 stars is you're here exploring what that may look like. 3 stars is you've recently installed that. 4 stars would be that you are implementing it and getting in the flow. And then 5 stars is that it's rolling along nicely. And Nicole again is going to read it back in about 30 seconds.
That one I'm having a little bit harder of a time seeing the outcomes. Can someone help me look at it? Or tell us how many people, kind of what's the stars looking like? Oh, there it is. All right, so it's on average looking about 3 stars.
Great, well, this is a perfect session for you then. We will talk through our whole process and what we've done from the very beginning, and that's what I'm going to take you to right now. Thank you again for responding. We are going to talk you through how we implemented this comprehensive classroom practices system. And it all began in 2015 when 7 of our districts were chosen for a federal study that led us through quick implementation of school-wide PBIS, check-in, check-out, and the comprehensive classroom practices system. I was one of the internal district coaches at the time, and then Midwest PBIS served as our external district coaches external coach and trainers. Our classroom practice system was built around 8 best practices, and the teachers were trained annually on each practice. And then they also self-assessed their perception of implementation every year on each practice. And then in the second year, I gave feedback to each teacher on every practice. And throughout both of those years, we walked the schools 3 to 4 times with the external coach to get a snapshot of what was going on in the schools based on our trainings and our surveys. And we would then do a debrief and we would show different data. And one of the data points we would show is the classroom practices data. And then we would give highlights and recommendations for moving forward for the staff and the team. And this structure was really done in an I do, we do, you do model where the external Midwest PBIS coaches really led the work at first, and then we would do it together in the debrief. And then I ended up in the end of the couple of years presenting the debriefs on my own, or even with the internal staff that were on the team. And this is what the data looked like when we would debrief the classroom practices at that time. It was a quick aggregate of the classrooms that we walked, and we would have bullet points to talk about what we saw or what we'd like to see when we walk next time. And the aggregate data point was based on this rubric, and we've got these linked and they're in the files too. The snapshots that we use when we walk classrooms and when we've gotten the self-perception surveys. But this is, so we would walk 6 to 8 classrooms, and then we would tally the number of yeses and take that divided by all with the somewhat and no's included in order to get an aggregate data point to show the staff. And circle the yes there. And so when the study was over, the system for sustaining needed to shift. And because there were lots of changes going on. Well, first of all, the structure from the study left, and then our coaching model shifted from internal district coach to an external district coach model. And the sites that were in the study, I really identified, and it was generally the facilitator from the SLT team became the internal site coach. And we began to co-lead the classroom practices system. And the teams began to choose practices based on the data that was from the previous year. And that year of transition, we really needed to clarify the process in order to sustain it. And so this is the visual that was used to represent what we were doing within this classroom practices system. And so every team would choose 1 to 3 focus practices out of the 8 best practices. And they would do a review at a staff meeting. Well, we would do the review at the staff meeting of what that meant and do an activity. And then we would have a pre-perception survey. They were still assessing their view of implementation. And then this model of feedback became optional based on team decisions. So the site leadership team would decide whether or not all teachers would get feedback on the practices, or teachers could volunteer to get feedback on the focus practice. And then once that process was completed, we would do our external walkthroughs, myself and another coach. Sometimes our health and wellness coordinator would come with us. And then we would do a data debrief, which would not be on the same day as the classroom walkthrough, which is what happened in the study. But when there was time, really, that the school had time for us to do the data debrief. And so the data looks a little different, and I'll show you. And then the teachers would do a perception survey, a post-perception survey. And so this year, when we transitioned from the study, the data looked a little different. We would show the pre-survey results. The coach visit is from the feedback walkthrough. And then the PBIS coaches visit is our external visit. And then the post survey would get added in later. And then in the parentheses, you see the number of people that responded to a survey or the number of classrooms that were walked. And blue represents that the continuum of response strategies was the focus practice. And then the other 2 data points for opportunities to respond in the positive behavior game, which we like to call the PBG, or group contingencies, were baseline data points for schools to use as we would problem solve and decide what practices to focus on next moving forward. 2018, 2019, we were shifting to sustaining, and there was minimal external support that was needed to keep the process going. Our data analysis became deeper, and we did still do our external walkthroughs, because we always do our external walkthroughs and give back the data. But the internal coaches really led the process as far as looking through the data and coming up with the presentations. And then we also continued that focus of 1 to 3 practices per year. And this visual was updated because we no longer did the perception surveys. What we did instead was, because we were not training every practice, we needed a way to get the information to teachers on every practice. So there was a newsletter that I wrote that went out quarterly with a focus of 2 practices each quarter. And then the schools would, the site leadership teams, and I would be there too, we would do the practice review based on the focus practices before that walkthrough. And then that feedback component was the same. Then, and we continued the external walkthroughs and the data debrief the same. But a difference was that post the debrief, there were follow-up suggestions and actions that were taken place. So this is what the data report looked like from that year. And it was more in depth, and that's the evolution, is the data continued to get more in depth. And it was presented in a longitudinal form to see progress over time. The color coding was used to support a quicker read of the data, and you see that key to the side. And during this year, the teams really shifted their protocol to engaging more staff members in the analysis of data, to have a more collective move forward to work through this process. Another change in the data presentation around this year was based on the focus practice. This is actually data from Hughes. It was broken down into components in order to show what we saw on the walkthrough and what we collected. And this year, the team focused on behavior-specific praise. And once we'd walked through the first time around, they wanted us the second time we walked through, because of some action steps they took between walkthrough number 1 and number 2, they wanted us to look at behavior-specific praise again to have a comparison data point. And you will see that there was improvement because of their efforts, or a sustained 100% in some of the components that were broken down. And so I know this is what you guys have all been waiting for, is hearing from the internal site coaches, which I am so lucky to work with. I'm learning from them all the time. 2019, 2020, the internal coaches really took the wheel and went through this process like champions that they are. And we did still do that external walkthrough. And unfortunately, our efforts did get interrupted by COVID. And but I'm gonna now turn it over to Nicole so she can walk you through what they are doing at Bracker.
Hi, everyone. So at Bracker, Christy and I met on a monthly basis, and what we tried to do is really plan out how can we continue the great work that's already been happening to then move towards myself and the Tier 2 team really taking more of the lead and doing the work that Christy'd been doing and using her as a thought partner, planner, and then a person to give us another perspective on our data. And so what you see here is start of every school year, we have an August kickoff where it's a staff meeting. And during that staff meeting, one of the things that we talk about is our PBIS practices. So for last year's kickoff, one of the things that we did is we started giving everybody a ROAR binder. ROAR is our acronym for our expectations for the students. And we gave everybody a binder for 2 reasons. One, we had new teachers join our campus in the last couple years, and we wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page and understanding of our Tier 1 practices. And then the second reason we wanted to give the binder is we moved from the 8 Tier 1 classroom practices to the 6. And so with that, it gave us a great opportunity to review the classroom practices, and we really gave the staff time to review the practices, discuss them, and make sure we all had a good understanding of it. So one of the questions I see is, what does ROAR stand for? It stands for respectful, outstanding attitude, always safe, and being responsible. The second piece that we did with this is one of our focus practices was on our classroom teaching matrix. Our data from previous years showed that while we may have had them up, they weren't always tied to ROAR, and then sometimes they weren't posted well in the classroom for everybody to access. So we gave teachers time. They sat in grade level work and they worked together to design their classroom teaching matrix, making sure it's aligned to ROAR, giving them an opportunity to ask for help if needed, as well as giving them a template for them to work on. Because we always find that if we don't give teachers time to actually work on it and we ask them to do it, they walk away and typically it just doesn't get done, because we all know teachers' plates are very full, and particularly right now. And then the second thing that the third thing that we did was we had location-based expectations across the school, and we had small posters, but sometimes it was difficult to reference when we were out working with the kiddos. And so we rolled out having larger signs that were laminated, colored, and in the specific locations so that staff and students could refer to it easily. So that was our kickoff, trying to get everybody on the same page and to move us into the fall. Christy, go ahead and go next. So in the fall, we one of our focuses was on behavior specific praise. So one of the ways that we moved towards an internal coach taking the lead versus the external coach is I started to do walkthroughs with the staff without an external coach. I made sure staff knew it was not evaluative, and it was just about getting feedback. It was also helpful for me to see what was going on in the classrooms so that I could help coach teachers in their practices. So I had something called a teacher on special assignment. We call it a TOSA. They would come cover my class for 1 or 2 hours a month, and I would just do a quick 5-10 minute walkthrough. I had data sheets that I would take some data on. I'd leave some notes, leave it on the teacher's desk, and then I'd touch base with them during lunch just to let them know what they were doing great, and maybe some areas that they want to just think about for future practices. So I did that several times. And then in December, we did an all staff focus on the practice during a staff meeting. Every staff meeting, first staff meeting of the month, we have everyone classified and certificated in the meeting. And that's really important on our staff because we have 3 self-contained special education classrooms on our campus. So we have a lot of support staff. And not only do we want to make sure that our teachers are doing the practices with efficacy, we also want to make sure that our classified staff is as well. So that first staff meeting gives us a great time to talk about these things. So having done the walkthroughs, I took that information and we just did a review of, what does it look like when we are doing it in the best possible. What are we currently doing and what could we work on? And I allowed the teachers time to talk about, maybe do some self-reflection of what are they doing in all of the aspects of that practice and what might they need to work on in the future. And they came up with action plans. So we'll go ahead and go to the next one. So what became of that is then we had Christy and another one of our external coaches, Bess, walk through in January. And you can see here that we have our data for the last 3 years, 17, 18, 18, 19, 19, 20. The highlighted yellow are the areas that we chose to focus in the 1920 school year. And if you look at behavior specific praise, in 18-19, we were at 64%. But then we did a little bit of work, and by January, we were at 88% all over, all round, and 83% at an all-star level. So we were seeing that this work that we were doing with our staff of looking at our data, really digging a little bit deeper into our practices was helping. So based on that, we took this data back to what's called our site leadership team, our SLT, and we discussed, okay, what are we going to do with this data with the staff? Are we going to do what we've done in the past, which is either Christy or I present the data, tell them what they did well, tell them what they need to work on, and give them some action items to do? Or could we lead them through that process and guide them themselves? And so our decision was, let's lead them through the process. And that's going to allow us to have a little bit more buy-in from the staff. So we'll go through kind of what that looks like when we led them through that. Go ahead and go to the next one. So one of the questions I see here is, how did the staff respond to having me as a colleague walk through? I think everybody's always nervous when you have somebody walk through your room. I don't care how long you've been teaching. I've been teaching for 22 years. It makes me nervous. But at the same time, I think we also have a culture of respecting each other and talking about what needs to be worked on. And we're still building that culture. And so I really tried to make it as low key as possible. And definitely working on, hey, really focusing on the positives and knowing what we might need to work on as a staff and bringing that up as a presentation to everybody and not just singling people out. So when we did our discussion with the staff, we did it in a staff meeting. And here you can see our agenda. We reviewed the practices, we analyzed what went well, what needed to be improved on. We did brainstorming actions and gallery walk. And one of the things I want you to think about is, just for background for your information, is I've been on both sides of the coin. I've been a teacher having administration telling me or asking me to implement things, but I've also been an administrator and have also had to ask teachers to implement things. And some of my learnings in that is that sometimes the more control you can give the teachers in the process, the more say, the more choice, the more likely they're going to take ownership of it and really buy into it and keep it going. And it becomes more self-sustaining. So when we designed this presentation or analysis with the staff, I was keeping that in mind. How can I help them with that? So the first step we did is I gave them 7 minutes. Sorry, I'm going to back up just a little bit. I broke up the staff into very specific groups. I broke them up into one for each classroom practice, and I was very strategic in who I was putting there. There's always some naysayers sometimes on a site, and I wanted to make sure that they were spread out, and also with our champions who really believed in this work. So you get a good balance in the discussion in the groups. So keeping that in mind, they were given 7 minutes to read through their classroom practice and really make sure everybody was on the same page with their classroom practice of what it should look like and what is the best practice of implementing it. So when they looked at the data, they could analyze the data as accurately as possible. I asked them to do it at level 0, which is our voice levels, just to give everybody some thinking time and highlight what stood out. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So here's the data that they were given to look at. And I'm going to have Christy talk about it because she was the one who put it together for us.
Like I was saying earlier, one of the evolutions of our data debriefs and the data we gave back to teams is that every year it got deeper. And so what we wanted to do this year is give site leadership teams, whole staff, a glimpse of what we see and what we're doing as we're walking in, and give them a full view of our work. So based on the previous years, we were aggregating the data only based on the yes column, which became all-star implementation. And this last year, we decided to lump in the somewhat acceptable implementation to that aggregate in order to increase motivation and let people decide really where they wanted to focus in order to increase their implementation into all-star. And then we renamed no to did not in place or not observed. Again, we felt this was a more motivating way to move the needle and transfer ownership and knowledge to the schools.
So the next step that we did with them is using the data that Christy put together. We had them first look at their data, each group, of what went well, write down those Post-it notes, put them on some chart paper, and then share out with the whole staff. And we wanted to make sure we celebrated the hard work that we'd been doing. Go ahead and go to the next one. The second piece was working as groups and then looking at the data and saying, okay, what needs to be improved? What can we improve on? And taking time to really write that out on Post-it notes, putting it on the chart, and then sharing it out with the staff again. So everybody was given thinking time, discussion, and then they would share it out with the whole staff. Go ahead and go to the next one. The biggest piece to that is not only did we discuss what needs to be improved on, but they were given time to brainstorm actions that we could do as a staff to move our needle, to continue to meet the needs of our students and implement our practices the best way possible. So the staff for each group would brainstorm as many actions as they could think of to implement in the future. And then what we had them do next on the next slide is do a gallery walk. So in this gallery walk, we put all the posters up around the room. We gave everybody time, and it was silent time where nobody was talking, and they could walk around the room and just look at the information. Everybody was asked to put down 5 dots on the action items that they thought would best help move our needle moving forward. You could give them sticky dots, markers. My staff just used markers and put 5 around. And so then they did that. And once they did that, we took a look at the trends of what people thought would be the best way to make our improvements. Go ahead and go to the next one. So here you see the actual charts. The first is prevented and prompts teaching, teach behavior and routine. And the biggest thing there is post routines for each area in the room. So teachers were posting routines in our room, but not necessarily in each area. And in order to help the students just really remember those expectations, we talked about breaking apart the posters and making them specific for each area. The classroom teaching matrix, while we had them, we really wanted to make sure that the ROAR posters that we had for the expectations at lunch were closer to the tables. So I had them up by the tables, but people felt that they needed to be closer. So that was good feedback, and it was an easy fix of moving those posters. The next one was our behavior specific praise, which we'd been focusing on, and individual reinforcers. And teachers really highlighted that we needed to take a deep breath and look for positives. And so this is really important when we're dealing with some of our really struggling, is to always find those small positives of how they're improving, so that we're not always focusing on those negatives, because they do make improvements, and sometimes it's hard to see when you're in it, but the more we can focus on it, the better. And then we looked at group contingencies. This was a really interesting one. So when the grant happened, the school discussed using classroom-wide and group contingencies, but it was never really said, yes, you have to use it, or no, it's a choice. And it came out in this discussion that people were like, well, do I have to do this, or don't I have to do this? And what we decided was it needed to go back to the SLT for discussion, and really make a decision of, was this something that we were going to expect everybody to do? I will say that the pandemic kind of stopped the discussion on that, just because we went into crisis mode in March and trying to deal with teaching a different way, which was when we were going to talk about that. So some things were put on hold because of what we've been experiencing. The last was responses to inappropriate behavior, and the fact that teachers were correction, but maybe not using its specific language and not tying it back to ROAR. So we wanted to make sure that that was also happening. So as far as next steps for our school, we were going to take those items back to the SLT and really talk about how could we roll out teachings around it and implementation of it. And unfortunately, all of this discussion happened February, and then several weeks later, our schools were shut down in March due to the pandemic, and we've had to kind of shift our focuses. Doesn't mean that the work's not going to happen. I already have a plan when we're finally back on campuses, but we did have to shift, and Christy will talk about that a little bit later. But right now, next is Jaime, and he's going to talk about how Hughes was using data in their practices.
Sorry, just realized I was not unmuted. So sorry. So at Catherine Hughes Elementary, our work with using data consistently, collaboratively, and deliberately to change classroom practices has all been over the past 5 years. The work which I'm presenting in the session began in August of 2019, when our PBIS site leadership team met, as we had done in previous years, to plan our 2019-2020 PBIS kickoff presentation for the staff. We had 3 goals in mind for this kickoff. One was reviewing our multi-tiered systems of support and behavior management process. 2, reviewing the longitudinal PBIS, which walked through observation data from the previous 2 years. And 3, selecting 2 tier 1 practices based on the walkthrough data to target for improvement during the 1920 school year. I do want to note here, though, that as the 18-19 school year was coming to a close, we had already presented the staff with behavior tracking tool data through Swiss reports. We had also presented student survey data, which we had collected with Google Forms. Based on these data, the staff had selected a focused behavior to target for improvement during the upcoming 19-20 school year. At that time, we had ended up choosing respect as our school-wide focus behavior. So during our kickoff presentation, we once again used Google Forms, this time to survey the staff about the 2 Tier 1 practices that, based on the walkthrough data presented, they believed we should target for improvement. The 2 practices which received the most votes from staff were encouraging appropriate behavior and continuum of response strategies. During our September PBIS site leadership team meeting, which I will from here on call PLT meetings, just to prevent myself from losing my breath throughout the presentation, we began planning the upcoming professional development presentation for the staff. Our goal was to have the staff really dig deeper into the criteria for the highest possible point score on the coach's walkthrough observation rubric for the 2 practices which the staff had selected. We knew that we only had about half an hour at the October staff meeting to present our professional development activity, along with the Tier 1 and Tier 2 updates. So in preparation, we blew up the 2-point column on the rubric for the practices we had chosen and glued them onto chart paper. We created 4 charts in all, since we had separated encouraging appropriate behavior into 1, teaching behavior and routines and preventative prompts, 2, behavior-specific praise and individual reinforcers, and 3, group contingencies. And as you can see, there is an example of one of the charts that we used during our presentation. At the October meeting, we divided the staff into 4 small groups and assigned each group one of the charts. They were tasked with discussing and charting in response to possible challenges or support needed and ideas for effective implementation of their group's assigned practice. After about 10 minutes of discussion and charting, each group shared out their ideas with the rest of the class. With the rest of the staff. These charts were then posted in the staff room for future reference. Later that month, at our next PLT meeting, we reviewed the charts and discussed possible ways to address the comments the staff had written under possible challenges or support needed. In the end, as we knew that we believed in the power of the positive behavior game to transform classroom behavior, we decided that we would focus on encouraging more teachers to try the positive behavior game in their classroom. This was a strategy that we knew would target all areas of encouraging appropriate behavior, while also supporting our focus on improving respect. In November, when we were again given time to present at a staff meeting, we set up the PBG challenge. First, the few teachers who actually practiced the positive behavior game in their classrooms attested to its potential for vastly improving classroom behavior. Then we challenged the staff to play the game every day for at least a month. Several teachers accepted the challenge and began playing the game, modifying it for their class and for their specific purpose. While some teachers used the game to improve listening skills and transitions, others used it to improve on-task behavior. In January, the district coaches conducted their first walkthrough observation of the school year. Later that month, at our PLT meeting, Christy presented both our walkthrough observation data disaggregated by practice and our longitudinal aggregate data. I first want to point out here that each of the first year's data on this longitudinal aggregate data slide are based on 2 walkthroughs. We were only able to carry out 1 walkthrough observation during the 1920 school year before the shelter-in-place order went into effect. Also, for group contingency, in the 1920 school year, all 6 teachers observed demonstrated some of the practices. In the 2 preceding years, only 1 of the 6 teachers observed had demonstrated any evidence of these practices. We did show growth in 2 out of the 4 areas that we targeted for improvement: teaching behavior routines and preventative prompts, and continuum of response for inappropriate behavior. Despite the lower number for group contingency, however, we do consider it an overall improvement, since all 6 teachers observed showed evidence of the practices as opposed to only one of the 6 teachers, as had been the case in the previous 2 years. Strong evidence of behavior-specific praise has often been especially challenging for our teachers to demonstrate during walkthrough observations. Unlike at Bracker, where their scores for behavior-specific praise were really high in comparison, not that I'm comparing, but in part this is because not all our teaching staff believe in rewarding students for expected behavior, and that has been a conversation that's we've been meaning to have to kind of address this head on with the staff, and it just, for some reason or other, it just hasn't happened. So it is also partly due to the inclusion of the optional components, such as links to the school-wide expectations and the rewarding of tangible acknowledgements in the observation protocol conducted by our district coaches. So you can see this in the walkthrough observation, this aggregate data slide. Here, the data for behavior-specific praise has been entered into the 2-point rubric, similar to the one that Nicole showed you earlier for her site. The totals for acceptable and all-star implementation were combined for an overall acceptable evidence percentage of 61. Based on the full criteria for behavior-specific praise, we show a decline over time, as the data in the longitudinal slide shows. So let's go back to the longitudinal slide, Christy. Thank you. So without the data points for links to school-wide expectations and tangible reinforcement, however, our last score would have averaged to 75%. Of course, we would have to adjust the previous 2 years' data in the same manner for accuracy, but 75% does present better than the reported 1%. In February, during the PBIS walkthrough debrief at a staff meeting, Christy and the site leads presented the walkthrough data, as well as pictures of evidence of the PBIS practices across the school sites where the coaches observed. At the end of the meeting, we asked the staff to write any comments they might have in response to our presentation in a Padlet that we had created for the debrief. As you can see from the Padlet, it was divided into questions, next steps, suggestions and feedback, challenges, suggestions, and feedback. Most of the staff's comments were added under the next steps column, where they indicated their plans to begin some form of group contingency practice in their classrooms. Later that month, during our PLT meeting, we discussed the comments the staff had made in the Padlet. And by the way, this was 2 days before Valentine's Day, which explains the background on the Padlet. And so later that month, during our PLT meeting, we discussed the comments the staff had made in the Padlet, and we were planning to address them at our upcoming staff meeting in April. Then we had to shelter in place, and we were no longer able to follow through with these plans. Our main takeaway from this experience, however, was that when classroom teachers use data to identify needs and to track growth, we can influence one another to incorporate practices that will support students in positive ways. And I do very much look forward to the day that we can continue this influential work that our team had started. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Now I'm going to hand it over back to Christy.
Thank you so much, Jaime and Nicole. You guys are such an inspiration. Whew, gotta get a little teary. This is so amazing. Hold on, let me move forward here. Okay. So one of the things that we wanted to do differently, Bess and I, you've heard her name, she's my co-coach, and we've worked in this process together, is we wanted to really highlight the work that's going on at 10 schools, because currently we have 10 schools that are in this classroom practices system, and we wanted to highlight that for the schools to see the work of others and the district to see the power of this work. And so there is a PowerPoint that shows all 10 schools and evidence of each practice we looked at as we were doing the walkthrough system last January, which was encouraging appropriate behavior, continuum of response to inappropriate behavior, and the classroom teaching matrix. I'm not going to go into it now, but that is there for you guys to click on, and you should be able to see it. And so we're going to now transition to our current reality. And as known by all, our process was interrupted by the pandemic, and it really halted our work in the sense that we just have presented, though it expanded our work in some scopes. And so when I was preparing for this conference, I was a little stuck because there was so much that there was so much information that we wanted to share. But then in mid-September, I went to the California Virtual PBIS Conference, and I saw Brandy Simonson presenting this model. And our transition into the virtual world really clicked, and I felt like this is a really good foundation to show what we've done moving forward. And so when you look at this, our district has, and especially our PBIS schools, have touched on 4 out of the 5 of these critical futures for continuing to enhance the foundation. And I think that her presentation was titled Back to Basics, or Back to the Foundation. And I thought, you know what, we don't have to go back. We've never left it. We've been there for 6 years. So how do we enhance it? And so mid-June, I was tasked with developing an action team to create social emotional learning for elementary schools for reopening. And that consisted of creating the action team, which was a teacher from every grade level, TK through 5th, special education rep, and an administrator. And in this creation of team, it was really important to me that they were all teachers for the most part doing the work. They were all teachers except for one administrator, and it was actually the Hughes administrator, and Nicole was on the team too. And because we are going to be asking teachers to do this work, so it needs to be a resource produced by teachers. And so what our final product was 5 weeks of lesson plans written around the core competencies from CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. It has a trauma-informed lens with restorative practices embedded, and then 2 of the 6 classroom practices were embedded. And I don't know if I said this earlier, but you have to remember we have 10 elementary schools currently that are implementing PBIS. We have 18 elementary schools in total. So this is rolled out at all 18 elementary schools. And when we did present this resource at the beginning of the year, there were site lead reps from each school that presented the resource, a teacher. Actually, we had 17 out of 18 elementary schools had teachers that presented this curriculum to their teachers, to their staff. So if you go back, if you think back, not go back, but if you think back to the visual that I got from Brandy Simonson, district-wide through the SEL resource, we were able to touch on 3 of those features. Connection was embedded into the SEL resource through morning meeting, the greetings, sharing, messaging, and the connection activity, which was mindful, which it was not, it is, because there is also a template that can keep this going as long as teachers are wanting to implement it. And so the connection activity is either a mindfulness activity, a movement break, a game, or another like share type of activity. And then the support feature was based in the routines and rules, and 10 of the schools would be connecting those routines to their school-wide expectations. And then the teach component is going to be these practices that were embedded in the SEL, which is the define, teach, and acknowledge rules and routines, and then the continuum of consequences for unexpected or problem behavior. And so the PBIS schools are able to take it one critical feature further with monitoring, and all of the PBIS teams currently have their tier 1 and tier 2, 3 teams up and running. They are at varying levels of implementation for their data collection processes, but all are having the conversation about electronic BTTs, which are behavior tracking tools, which is what a referral is normally called. I mean, so we call referrals behavior tracking tools because a referral generally suggests that you're sending somebody out. So we wanted to rename it behavior tracking tool to show that it's just a form of data collection that we use to inform our actions. And we've rolled that out in some areas, and then we're considering how to roll it out in others. And then the other thing that we're doing a lot more intentionally is looking at the district. The district came out with a discipline policy for virtual learning and an attendance engagement policy, and we are really using data to make decisions based on those systems. Oh, and then one thing about the behavior tracking tool, I'll go back to that, is that one of the schools that rolled it out, we have, and it's actually Bracker where Nicole is Nicole teaches. We added social emotional behavior characteristics to track also in order to align our systems. So moving forward, there's really exciting stuff happening actually. We just started. So SEL for reopening, my co-coach Beth, she took the secondary and rolled out practices around social emotional learning. And so we have now engaged the entire district in this work with a little bit of a rebrand. And we have just started an exploration process that we had 66 yeses on our calendar and 66 people showed up on Wednesday. And we are going through and really defining what social emotional learning is, showing what the MTSS structure is and how we can use that as a framework to arrange our interventions and our practices and really to get stakeholder voice. And we want to hear from everybody. We really want to continue to use what we've learned through the study, which is, you know, it took a few years, but getting that internal voice in the picture and then take this farther and really define a tier 1. It would be so amazing if we did it district-wide. But the other thing we're going to do moving forward is continually clarify and define the tiered system for distance learning and then back in person when we go back in person, and support sites and the district with continuous improvement efforts. So oh yeah, here are our resources for the walkthroughs. I think I saw a question about what are the best walkthrough tools you've used to have an aggregate, and these really are the tools we've used. We've always used the resources for Midwest PBIS. When they revise them, we have revised what we use. We love them, and they've really helped our staff break those practices down into components and dig deeper in the classroom practice implementation. These are those questions that you want to consider when you're working in your team and you're thinking about how this classroom practices system compares to your priorities. Who would do this work? Where would it live? Whose responsibility would it be? What may you want to stop doing to make room for this work? And how will it be assessed whether it's being implemented well or working? And then please remember to complete an evaluation for our session. And then we're going to go into a question and answer session actually. So I think there we go to question and answer.
Kelly, did you want to ask the questions or did you want one of us to?
I can certainly do that for you. So the first question was, what is the very first step to begin PBIS in your school or district? And how did you choose a system to begin working in your classrooms and collect data? And then same set of questions, should your tier 1 be evaluated and made sure it's done with fidelity prior to beginning tier 2?
So I can jump in for how ideally you want to go through an exploration process and have consensus around implementing tier 1. Our story is very much different. And, but you would want to go through an exploration process and make sure and have a district leadership team in place that is really helping you guide through that process to make sure there's room to implement with fidelity. And I don't know if any of the Jen or Kimberly want to jump in because and add to that.
Yeah, I think that was a really good answer, Christy. I think when you're first looking to get started, it's helpful to use your data, of course, to kind of take a look at what are the needs in your buildings and in your districts, and then think about how the PBIS framework could help address those needs. And so, you know, if there's a need, many schools have challenges with classroom behavior. And so this is often an area where schools want to get started right away, and then sort of use that process to help get people engaged and go through that exploration process that Christy was talking about.
And Jen, I think someone was asking about maybe they're looking for an electronic version, and I believe Terry Scoa, is it SCOA? I'm trying to remember the name of the tool he has. Or
Yeah, Terry has a data collection tool that can be used. I will find a link and put it in the chat for people. With the tool that's available at Northeast PBIS, we spent some time trying to create an app and frankly ran out of money and time. But a number of the schools that we're working with have put those questions in a Google form that they then use to quickly aggregate the data across grade levels and across their schools. So I think it's really easily collected electronically. You can also, of course, do it on paper, but electronically is much easier. And teachers have also used it as a self-report measure, so they can kind of enter their own scores as well on that.
Yeah, and I like the paper because we're going to talk about in the next session around capacity building. And Christy, when you talk to that comprehensive approach, it's, shadowing one another, going in teams of, dyads, triads to collect data and learn and reflect on what did you see? How did you see that? So the paper kind of allows that exchange. So it's twofold, collecting data on the classroom practices and giving us a structure to then build capacity amongst ourselves with coaches. Jen, I think you and I are going to manage questions from here on out.
I was just going to say that I was going to give you the second one. There's a great list. We've been keeping them in order. So what were the 8 practices I believe you discussed at the beginning of the presentation?
They are actually the same as the 6 that are linked. I'm gonna go, I wonder if I can go back on here. Okay, so Midwest PBIS rearranged the way that they present the practices, but they are all embedded in the classroom teaching matrix. It used to be broken up where rules and routines and expectations were separate. And then the engagement and multiple opportunities to respond used to be broken up into behavior specific praise and positive behavior game. So these are actually all 8 practices embedded. I don't know if you remember back to the aggregate data from Hughes and Bracker when we reported out last year, these actually provide more data points. They're like 9 because there's like the prompting and reteaching. There's one additional sub component that we were able to pull as a data point from, and so they've just been condensed into 6 practices, but they're all still embedded.
And I'll just add that those are the exact same practices with slightly different names and numbers as what's in that supporting and responding to student behavior guide that I mentioned at the beginning, and the practices that Terry and Amy talked about in the first session of this strand. That there are lists of 10, lists of 8, lists of 5, but it really is just, as Christy was describing, kind of different iterations of the exact same things.
The next question was, how did you handle the introduction of new teachers to the process?
I think that's an evolving practice. Christy and I have kind of been working on it, these last couple of years. Typically, we would do just a meeting with them, and then at the beginning of the school year to kind of go over the practices, and then they could meet with the tier 1 leader at the school throughout the year. But quite honestly, new teachers are so overwhelmed with what they have on their plate. To try to add more meetings for them was a little bit unrealistic. So that's why I kind of did the whole let's all get on the same page at the beginning of the school year with the whole staff. So it wasn't adding one more thing and then checking in on them. I don't know if that's the best way either. I think this is still something we're trying to figure out. What is the best way to meet new teachers' needs without overwhelming them when it's already so overwhelming getting a new job?
Can I talk about Hughes and inducting new teachers into the PBIS process? So I know at Hughes, that's our teacher induction for PBIS has also been evolving. Christy, for a couple of years, has been basically getting coverage for new teachers so they can go observe other teachers who really engage in the PBIS practices in their classrooms. So they have a model to observe and learn from, and then support them as they implement the practices in their own classrooms as well.
Yeah, Jaime, I kind of almost forgot about that for a second. It's like that was an amazingly powerful experience, and the principal at Hughes covered their classroom and did a project-based learning experience with them. And then I would meet, we would talk about the practices and go in, and they would do their takeaways, and we debrief. Very powerful.
Okay, so how did staff respond to doing the walk, or excuse me, how did staff respond to having a colleague friend in their building doing the walkthroughs?
Well, nobody outwardly got mad at me, so that was good. I think overall everybody was okay with it because just because we're pretty close staff. I mean, we're a very small staff. Our school has only, I think, 18 teachers. We only have 2 classrooms per grade level. So we talk about data all the time. We're a PLC school, so we have that time where we talk about data. So I really just tried to make it very low key, like, hey, these are the great things you're doing. You know, made me think about this. And I think people appreciated it. But to be honest, nobody outwardly came out and was like, oh, I hate this, don't do this. So I think everybody's okay with it.
I don't know, Jaime, if you want to give perspective. I know that 6 years ago when we started, there were some schools that when we would walk, I'm a teacher first, and I taught at Bracker. Nicole actually teaches in the classroom that I taught in, and so that's interesting. So Bracker was a really easy place to walk through first because I had the relationships. I mean, I think it all goes back to relationships. If you have those relationships, it's pretty easy to walk a classroom because they know you have good intentions. And I think we are actually, Nicole and I are with you on the next session, and this is getting into some of our conversation about what we're going to talk about, creating a culture where it's supportive. And when a person walks through, it's not evaluative. My teaching experience was with students with severe emotional and behavioral disabilities. And if people were always in my classroom, and if they weren't, that is actually more nerve-wracking than having people in my classroom. So I think that's what we want, is the feeling that when people are there, they're there to help, whether it be taking data to give us back that feedback for us to improve, or to help support us as we're doing what we're doing. That's what we want to create. And that is really the shift that I feel like I've seen at Bracker and Hughes. It's very nice to go into teachers' classrooms. They're very collaborative schools.
Christy and I missed a question that said, I heard Christy early on touching on using the comprehensive classroom systems process. Like this was a no-brainer silver bullet to use to implement classroom PBS. What is that?
So it really is taking these classroom practices, and like Jennifer's been saying, there are all kinds of different resources that you can use to develop. You'll see the VTSS 10 in the next session, but having your core defined tier 1 practices and then creating a system around it where we're training teachers, coaching teachers, supporting teachers on implementing them, and then taking the fidelity data in a structure where we're giving back that information to a leadership team, and then having the leadership team make decisions, whether in the beginning that might be not involving, not showing, it just depends on what the leadership team decides, but maybe showing how we went through the process, and there was like an evolution of data where we would show an overarching data point, and then it got deeper, and then it gets deeper and deeper as everyone is more familiar and taking more ownership around it, and then using that data to make the decisions for how you develop and move forward with your tier one classroom practices system is really what the comprehensive classroom practice system is. And then, we have bigger goals and dreams for this, and that's getting like our tier 2 teams, our wellness coordinators, our principals, our psychologists, all of our support staff actually going through these walkthroughs so that it's continuously expanding to a culture that's based on coaching, and that people are doing all this work together. And that way, when we have students who need interventions that need a higher level of support, and we're scaling up the frequency and the dosage of that practice, we're using the same language, and we're able to really always be grounded in our tier 1.
The next one was about the best strategies, tools you've used to collect walkthrough data in a way that you have immediate access and aggregate data on classroom practices.
I think this one touched kind of back and forth on whether or not we're taking them paper pencil or through Google Forms. And we do paper pencil, and it is something like Kim really talked about how it's nice to use to compare data points when you're walking together, and we do a walkthrough together system. I mean, I think Nicole, when she did her feedback, she's giving that feedback to the staff, so she's going to want to write it out. So I found I'm really good at calculating quickly. I've got really good at calculating quickly, but we don't use any electronic apps or anything yet for data collection. So we've just gone paper pencil and used these rubrics.
In a couple of schools that we're working in, folks are doing both. So entering the scores in a Google form so that they can quickly get access, but then filling something out on paper that they can then leave with the teacher with a note of encouragement or some feedback. I liked Nicole's, this made me think about this. So those sorts of comments that you can leave with the teacher so they get that immediate feedback as well, and don't kind of wonder where they are at in the middle of that aggregate when the data gets shared back out.
So another question was around how you rebranded. We have about 5 more minutes. So I'll give you a couple more. How did we rebrand SEL for your staff? How did you?
So that was really in the reopening work, and we didn't have to rebrand SEL. Well, we had, unfortunately, with the quick implementation of MTSSB, which was about 6 years ago, and I think just in general, sometimes PBIS, people do not have the full understanding of what it really is. And so not every school in our district is ready to implement PBIS in its framework. So what we were able to do with social emotional learning this year is really align and integrate all of those things and use it as a place for us to begin an exploratory phase for really defining everything we do, is the hopes, fingers crossed. And so that's really the rebrand, is that we are right now calling all of this work trauma-informed, restorative practice, the best classroom practices. We're just rebranding it under the social emotional learning framework and lens.
Great. And if you wouldn't mind, whoever has the PowerPoint, just look into the evaluation. If people don't mind either using that code to get to the evaluation or using your evaluation tab. Probably last 1 or 2 questions. Any additional ideas you have on how to get teacher or staff buy-in, teacher and staff buy-in?
I find being really honest with the staff about what mistakes I'm making in my own classroom, right? We are not perfect. And so when I'm talking to the staff about what we need to implement, I say, hey, listen, this is what I'm forgetting too. And it's normal. We have so much on our plate. Sometimes you forget some of the pieces. And so I think they find that very relatable, and that it's okay to make mistakes. So really coming at it as, I'm not perfect, nobody's. So I think that just helps, having those honest conversations. And then back to the relationships, what Christy said, like building those relationships with your staff, and having that established before I go into a classroom is pretty important.
Great. Nicole, thank you guys all so much for that. We're about to be kicked out because we're wrapping up, but I want to say thanks so much. And you got a ton of thank yous in the chat box, and great job, guys.